They say home is where the heart is, but for me, home was a promise. It was the smell of cedar wood in the hallway, the way the sunlight hit the stained glass in the library at exactly 4 in the afternoon, and the echo of my grandfather's laughter. When my grandfather passed away 3 years ago, he left that house to me. It wasn't just real estate, it was a sanctuary. He knew my parents, his own son and daughter-in-law, viewed the world through the lens of dollar signs and decimal points. He knew they had a habit of investing other people's dreams into their own failed ventures. That's why he was careful. That's why he looked me in the eyes and said, "Sarah, this is your foundation. Don't let them shake it." For 3 years, I lived there, tending to the garden and keeping the legacy alive. My parents, Robert and Diane, lived in their own upscale condo across town. Or so I thought. They visited often, always commenting on how valuable the property had become. "You know, Sarah," my mother would say, trailing her manicured fingers over the antique mahogany dining table. "This place is far too big for a single woman. Think of the liquidity you're sitting on." I always brushed it off with a smile. I didn't need liquidity. I needed the roots. But then, the atmosphere changed. The calls became more frequent, and their tone turned from suggestive to desperate. They talked about a once-in-a-lifetime real estate development deal they were heading. They needed capital, a lot of it. I told them no, firmly and repeatedly. I thought that was the end of it. I thought that despite their greed, there was a line they wouldn't cross. I thought I was safe in my grandfather's embrace. Until that Tuesday morning, I pulled into the driveway after a weekend away and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a sold sign hammered into the front lawn. Not for sale, sold. 2 men in suits were standing on my porch, holding clipboards, gesturing toward the roof as if they already owned the sky above it. My heart didn't just drop, it shattered. I felt the air leave my lungs. How could a house be sold when the owner never signed a single paper? I walked up those steps, my hands shaking, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions, unaware that the people I called Mom and Dad had just committed the ultimate betrayal. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. One of the men looked up, offering a professional yet cold smile. "You must be the tenant," he said. "We're with the development group. The previous owners, the Millers, closed the sale yesterday. We're here for the initial inspection." The room tilted. Previous owners. My parents had represented themselves as the owners. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not yet. I went inside and called my father. He answered on the second ring, his voice sounding strangely upbeat, as if he were waiting for this call. "Sarah, honey," he said, "before you get upset, just listen. We did this for you. That house was a burden. We've rolled the proceeds into the new development. In 5 years, you'll be a millionaire." "You stole my house, Dad," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "Grandfather left it to me. I have the deed. I have the will." There was a pause. Then, my mother's voice came onto the line. "Sarah, don't be dramatic. We found the papers in the attic last month. We had a power of attorney drawn up years ago when your grandfather was slipping. It gave us the right to manage his estate. We just updated it. It's all legal, dear. We're your parents. We know what's best." They hadn't just sold a house. They had forged my life away. They had gone behind my back, used an outdated, practically prehistoric power of attorney, and likely forged my signature on several documents to fast-track the sale to a developer who didn't care about the history, only the dirt. For the next 48 hours, I was a ghost in my own home. I watched them start to pack things, my things, into boxes. My mother actually had the nerve to show up with bubble wrap. "We need to be out by Friday, Sarah. The developers are on a strict timeline." She looked at me with a pity that felt like an insult. She thought she had won. She thought I was the little girl who would eventually stop crying and thank her for the check. But as I sat in the middle of my grandfather's library, surrounded by the boxes of a life they were trying to erase, I remembered something. My grandfather was a man of many secrets, but he was also a man of deep foresight. He knew my parents were capable of this. He had warned me once, months before he died, about a safety net. I began to tear through his old desk, not the top drawers they had already ransacked, but the hidden compartment behind the velvet lining of the stationery drawer. My fingers brushed against a cold, thin piece of plastic, a small USB drive, and a single notarized envelope dated just 1 week before his passing. I opened it, and as I read the words, the weight in my chest began to lift. It wasn't just a letter, it was a revocation of power of attorney and a transfer on death deed that had been filed and time-stamped privately. But more importantly, there was a document titled Restricted Covenant. He had placed a legal tie on the property that forbade its sale to any corporate entity for 99 years without the express, notarized consent of his biological grandchild. The day of the final walkthrough was gray and drizzly. My parents were there, looking triumphant, flanking the lead developer. They were ready to hand over the keys and collect the final massive installment of their investment. I stood by the fireplace holding a single manila folder. "Sarah, please," my father sighed, seeing me. "Don't make a scene in front of the buyers." "I'm not making a scene, Robert," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. It felt powerful. "I'm just here to provide the missing paperwork." I handed the folder to the developer. As he read, the color drained from his face. My mother tried to snatch it, but he pulled it back. "What is this?" the developer asked, his voice low and dangerous. "This document says the power of attorney was revoked 3 years ago. And this covenant, this land, can't be developed. It's restricted." "That's impossible," my mother shrieked. "We have the papers." "You have forged papers, Diane," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I've already spoken to my attorney. The sale you closed yesterday, it's void. It never happened in the eyes of the law. And since you've already spent the earnest money deposit on your new cars and office space, I imagine the developers will be wanting that back immediately." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. The developer turned to my parents, his eyes narrowing. "My legal team will be in touch by the end of the hour. We'll be suing for fraud, damages, and every cent of the deposit." He turned and walked out, his team following him like a dark cloud. My parents looked at me, not with love or even regret, but with pure, unadulterated rage. "You ruined us," my mother screamed. "We're your parents. How could you do this to your own family?" "You weren't acting like parents when you sold the roof over my head," I replied. "You were acting like thieves, and thieves don't get to keep the loot." I watched them drive away, knowing that their glamorous world was about to crumble under the weight of lawsuits and debt they had brought upon themselves. I walked back into my house and locked the door. It was quiet, beautifully, perfectly quiet. I realized then that blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Respect does. My grandfather had protected me from beyond the grave because he loved me more than they ever could. I sat on the floor of the empty hallway and finally cried, not out of sadness, but out of relief. I had lost my parents that day, but I had found my strength. And more importantly, I had kept my home. Some things are simply not for sale.